So we're just really elated to be here to talk about the eastern screech owl and some of its relatives. So what are you going to learn? We're going to cover a lot and hope it's not too much, but we'll make it as fun as possible because owls are really fun. So what is the Owl Wildlife Center? What is wildlife rehabilitation? Who are some of our patients? What Winnie's in our backyard? Who are some of his relatives? And a bunch of other stuff. So it's really important to understand what wildlife rehabilitation is, and just narrowing it down quite a ways, we treat and care for native wild animals that are hurt, sick, or orphaned and return them to the right habitat for that animal. So for instance, if we got in a, I don't know, bobolink, would we return it to a deep woodland? No, because we know that they're grassland birds. And so we always have to return them to their homes, and we try and get them back to the real homes of that animal, right where they came from, if it is safe for them, because they know where to find food, water, and shelter in their homes. So what do we need to know? Well, what state and federal permits we need to have, what vaccinations and equipment we need to stay safe from disease, what species we're even holding. Some of these animals that come into us, we've never seen before in our hands, and they can look really different than when you're looking at them through binoculars in the wild. So what animal are we actually holding, and what does that animal eat? That's really important for keeping it healthy in captivity. And how do we handle and house it so the animal and us are safe and secure? That's really important. How do we give it medicine? How do we bandage their wounds? When do we release it? When is it well enough to be released? Can it be released? And then where to release it again? And then lastly, amidst lots of other things, we need to know how to euthanize an animal because some of these animals can't be saved, sadly. And so we need to offer it humane euthanasia. And that can be hard to do, but it's a really important gift to give that animal. So what species have we decided to take on with the Iowa Wildlife Center? Well, it's not simple. All species of native birds, all species of reptiles, and mammals, well, it depends. Not all species all the time, because you can imagine in baby season, we get inundated with calls for all the baby squirrels and all the baby raccoons and all the baby bunnies. And we don't have the facilities, we don't have enough caging, we don't have enough space, we don't have enough help, we don't have enough money, so we have to limit it. And so we hold some of our spots for things like badgers, like we had this last summer, and some of the more specialized animals that other rehabilitators can't take in. There are about 80, 85 licensed rehabilitators in the state, and most of them take care of the more common mammals. So we serve to take care of the ones that they absolutely can't. And bats happen to be one of our specialties, so another flying animal. This is Wild Way. It's 75 acres of land that we own where we're developing our center. And I really hope that Iowa Young Birders and Wild Birds Unlimited customers will make it out to visit us and do some birding out there, because it's a really cool place, and we're restoring prairie and wetland and the savanna, and it's got woodland too. So, and we're trying to get trails built into the system so people can access it now before we have lots of enclosures and animals out there, because once that happens, then only part of it will be open to the public and the rest will be reserved for our patients and the wild. So there are dangers all around us, and I won't go into all of them, but for our owls, you wouldn't think of some of the dangers. So barred owls, you know, they eat a wide variety of prey diet, and fish is actually one of them. And this is an owl that was found by some fishermen fishing the Des Moines River a few years ago, and it was caught in a bank line. Somebody had stuck some fishing poles in the bank and left them there all night without watching them, which is not legal. Um, and he was all wrapped up in the fishing line. You can see line going into the water. You can see line coming from the end of the rod. He'd taken the rod and the line up into the tree over the river, and it was all tangled there. And he was just tangled and tangled and tangled here. So the anglers cut him loose from that and called us, and I ran over to Boone and picked it up. We got all of the monofilament fishing line removed from its wing. Amazingly enough, that bird was able to be released, because they often, when they twist and twist and twist, they often dislocate some of their joints at the very least. But this one, given time and care, was able to be released. So that's really cool. The other cool thing is that those illegal fishermen who put those bank sets in were caught the next weekend by the conservation officer based on the photograph here with the steps cut into the bank. And they were charged, well, the one especially was charged with illegal fishing, and they were forced to pay for the care of this animal in captivity. So that was very cool. Now, some of the things that we get in aren't injured, but they're orphaned, like this little baby nestling barred owl. And this came to us from the Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge a couple of years ago. And it was not able to be released because it was blind in one eye. And that puts, even though owls hunt primarily with their, what do they hunt with? With their hearing, they also need that vision to be able to make it through woodlands and avoid obstacles. They need that. It's been discovered that they really do need those both eyes to be in good shape. We used to think that they would survive with one eye, but their chances of survival decline a lot. And this owl, of course, being a baby, had never maneuvered at all in the wild, and so we could not release it, but it's now one of our education birds. So still a good story, a good outcome, and it's taught us an awful lot. The other thing that we need to learn, this is a recent patient. This is a barred owl that came from West Ames. Somebody saw it sitting on their bird bath, 0 degrees one night. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And when we got the call, and I needed help, I called Ames Animal Control, who love to go on wildlife calls with us, and we share that back and forth. And so the officer and I were able to pretty easily net this barred owl, which is never a good sign. And here I'm teaching one of our volunteers how to hold a barred owl for the first time. And of course, the feet are the danger zone of this animal, and we need to know what the danger zone is on all the species that we work with. But he's safely handling these feet to keep him safe, wearing these thick gloves, and to keep me safe while I go on and examine it. And we have a towel covering the head to keep it a little bit calmer. This was yesterday. This is the master here. This is Bruce, who has handled hundreds of raptors of all species. And so I didn't have to teach him anything. He's taught me a lot. And so we needed to get the barred owl out to weigh it and to look at the injuries and the damage, and to give it a little bit more assessment a couple weeks after we gotten it. So this is some of the damage of the primary wing feathers. You can see that a lot of them have been broken off and stripped of the veins, and it's not going to be a flighted bird at this point, of course. And there was also a puncture wound up towards the shoulder that I don't feel any broken bones. So we hope we're just dealing with a fracture. This will take time for this bird to molt these old raggedy feathers out and new feathers in, so it will be able to fly. There's another procedure we can do that's basically gluing parts of feathers from another bird onto these feathers, veins, and then being able to release it. But it's not ready for release yet anyway, so we'll just see how this goes. So another way to handle these animals safely, we don't want them to flap their wings a lot, especially if they've got injuries, but we don't want them getting loose in the exam room either. So just taking some tape, real simple painter's tape or not duct tape, masking tape, Neither of those things hold to feathers very well, but just enough that then we can control the wings and get it on the scale for getting a weight on it to see how it's doing in captivity. And you can see this one weighs 720 grams, so it wasn't gaining weight. And we decided we needed to increase the diet based on the weight of this animal and the body condition. So all that's really important. I have no idea where this came from, but it's a good one because of all the facilities we need, they really vary. And this is in our backyard. So we have on the left side of this cage, this is the Screech Owl Enclosure, and which has pretty much all of this. And over here, this is the barred owl. It's smaller, and we'll get a bigger one built for it, but for now it's fine. But this is the little bird that we really wanted to share with you today. And this was found, this is got a call from some people in Gilbert, and they said, there's this little owl in the snowdrift in our driveway, and it really needs help. And this was back in this was back February 14th in 2016. And so they brought it to us, and we examined it and started the process of figuring out what was wrong with it. And you can see with this one, it was not doing very well. The eyes are closed. That really means they're not feeling well. He should be alert and ready to pounce on us. We took it to Iowa State University, one of our main collaborators with their veterinary services. And so they looked at the eyes. An ophthalmologist actually has a special gizmo to look deep into both eyes. And they determined that it was blind in one eye. And here you can see that eye is open, the right eye is open fully, one eye is open fully and the other eye is still squinty, and that's definitely the one that was blind. And then they took different x-rays of this animal, and it didn't show any major breaks in the wings or the legs or any of the other bones, but it did have a small fracture of the scapula, and later was discovered too that it had the coracoid bone also was fragmented a little bit. And these were old injuries, not very old, but old enough that healing had started. So we think that we don't know if it collided with something, but it rendered it fairly flightless, and it wouldn't have been able to evade predators, which then is what happened to it in the end. And you can see here, it's kind of cool to see that one leg. You can see that this leg is kind of skinny. The muscles aren't very well developed, and this one is a normally developed leg, and that's because it couldn't use this leg. You can see some of the toes had been munched off. And all in all, this animal was in sad shape, but fixable shape. It had a puncture in the skull above that blind eye. Again, a couple of the toes were munched off that we then amputated, and we went on from there. The good news was that it was fixable. The feathers were well groomed, the heartbeat was good, the lungs were good. It hadn't been on the ground very long because the feathers were well groomed. The not so good news was the puncture on the skull, was that it was blind. It couldn't blink the right eyelid. So they were thinking they were going to have to remove the eye, because if you can't blink, you can't moisten the eye and it dries out. So if you can't see out of it and it's going to dry out anyway, they usually just remove the eye. And I said, well, let's give it a chance, and we'll put some ointment in it to add lubrication to it several times a day. And we'll see if we can get that function of blinking back anyway, so we wouldn't have to put it through removing the eye. And again, the left foot had 2 toes munched off that were amputated, and there was a small puncture under the wing, the left wing, which didn't amount to a whole lot, but we had to treat. Later, we realized it could not fly well, and that goes back to the damage of the scapula and the coracoid bone. And so we knew at that point that it would likely never fly well enough to release it. So then we decided that, well, what to do with it? We either euthanize it, we pass it on to another education facility to use in their program, or we keep it in our education program. So we did that, and now it's on our state and federal education permits to use in education programs like today. It was a really nice personality, pretty calm to be handled. And so that was also a deciding factor. So raptors are really cool with their specializations. One common thing about raptors is that they all have talons that we need to control. They have a curved beak to help them hold on and tear apart their prey. And they have great eyesight. So here, and they have their huge eyes in relation to the size of their skull. So here is an eyeball of an owl, we're pretending. And I didn't have a second tennis ball, so I got another dog toy out. So in relation to their skulls, they have really big eyes. And they're not round like a tennis ball, but they're more oblong, more spherical, or more oblong, and that allows more light to enter into the retina and allows it to see in dark conditions. And I will tell you that, well, then going on to the next slide, we didn't get into the, did you get into that hearing? I don't remember,
No,
we'll see.
We haven't talked about the hearing.
Oh, there we go, we'll talk about that. So other specializations, they have specialized feathers, that the owls have special fringes on the edges of their
To grab that wing.
flight feathers. Oh, I'm doing Bruce's part partly here, so I'm kind of discombobulated. Anyway, so here is the wing of a barred owl barn owl that didn't make it. And maybe you can see some of the fringes, the soft fringing on that.
And it's quiet. It's really quiet.
Really quiet. And so if we had like a red tail feather wing here, and we waved it around, you could hear the air rush through the feathers. But if you do that with an owl wing, it's silent. So they've got really cool feathers that they have to keep well groomed so they can remain silent and fly really well to catch their prey. They also have zygodactyl feet, which is basically the ability to have their 2 toes up and 2 toes back. And that helps them grasp their prey. And you can see here, the snowy owl picture is going in to catch its prey, and it's got those 2 talons, 2 feet, 2 toes up and the 2 toes behind. And they often will sit with the 3 toes up and the 1 toe behind, but they have that ability then to swing a toe back and have it be 2 up and 2 back. So they're really pretty cool feet, even on these birds. And then on the barn owl in particular, you see this photo with what we call the Pectinate Talon. And it has a special talon that has these hard fringes. It's kind of like a comb. And they use that then to help groom their feathers and keep them in top shape. And then here we've got the facial discs of these sweet barn owls, which we have behind us. And they have specialized feathers. And that facial disc, they're more rigid than the rest of their flight feathers, which are soft for silent flying. But these are pretty rigid, so they trap sound really well. Their ears are right at the edge of the facial disc.
Left ear is higher.
And especially in barn owls, they've got one ear is higher than the other, and they're angled at a slightly different direction. And that helps them triangulate their prey or fine tune exactly where that prey is in the dark with those special ears. So really cool specializations in owls. You'll notice that this is a heart-shaped disc, but it's a pretty big disc. You'll notice that some of the owls, like the screech owl, has a smaller disc, and the barred owl has a much bigger disc. And that's just all how they hear. It functions specific to that species. So some other specializations, I'll let Bruce talk about this one, but let me talk about the ear one. This reminds me, hearing. So their ear openings are huge. I mean, it just stuns people with how big the opening is of their ear. It's not little like ours, like finger size. It's more like the whole lobe of the ear. And we can look in that ear to look at the back of the eyeball to see if there's damage there. So that's really cool. Okay, you want to talk about the hearing a little bit?
Yeah. Are you gonna take this?
Oh, sure. We're switching it up a minute.
Okay.
We're going to switch out of the program temporarily to show the owl. So I thought this diagram showed how owls catch their prey by hearing alone. So just imagine this is a great gray owl. This is one of our rare winter visitors. But so just imagine this great gray owl is sitting 100 feet away and it heard this meadow vole moving under the snow. And they can hear and catch meadow voles that are a foot and a half, so 18 inches down from the top of the snow. So what this shows, the owl is flown toward what it's hearing. It's locked in now. It hears the vole directly under it, folds its wings, it starts to dive, and it brings its feet right up next to its beak. So basically it's still listening. It's still, the sound waves are still going in, and it's putting its feet right where its face would have been, and then it goes down into the snow feet first and catches that meadow vole prey. And they're very accurate at doing this. Barn owls can actually catch prey in total darkness 30, 40 feet away without, only by hearing, without seeing anything. So I don't know if we can, how to do this for sure, but we're going to try to show you the screech owl right now, and then I'll finish up talking more about other owls after that.
I'm gonna,
Oh yeah, okay, that'll work.
you can talk while I hold.
Okay.
So there he is. And he's not very big, you can see that, compared to the barn owl.
So-
Certainly not compared to the great horned owl.
So screech owls are smallest nesting owl. It stands maybe 9 inches tall if it's really trying to sit upright. It weighs less than half a pound. So I think 7 ounces is what they could weigh. The males typically weigh a little bit less than the female. So a male would weigh maybe 170 grams and a big female might go 200 grams. So they're pretty compact compared to other little owls that weigh less than they do. So this is the owl that Marlene was showing you all the slides of before. And he is he's been singing in our basement. I brought him in during the cold spell, and he was so happy to be in here, he started singing immediately. So each night, right at dusk, which is about the time that he normally would be out hunting, he starts doing a little trill. And I'm going to play that for you. Not sure how he's going to react to it.
Can you see what he's doing now? He's panting. We call it the gular flutter. He's kind
So that's the sound you might hear during summertime. Here's the one that he's doing right now. It's called the Winnie. Nope, I hit the wrong one. No, that's not right. I hit the wrong button. It's actually a trill that he does. This is a territorial call. It's a really soft little monotone. So you could potentially hear that this time of the year.
You can see that his ear tufts, they're not really ears, remember, because his ears are right behind his facial disc, just like on the other owls. Those ear tufts are for display. And when he's pretty calm, he'll have them up mostly. He's not very calm right now because this is all new for him to be up here listening to screech owls and in front of this is a new room for him. And so he's really alert and kind of anxious. And when he was panting a minute ago, he was kind of stressed out. So I monitor that, and then we get him kind of put away and get him comfortable again. and let him settle down. Can you see the whiskers around his beak? It's pretty amazing with these animals. I'm really honored to be able to work with them like this.
Bruce and
Okay.
Marlene, can I ask a quick
Mhm.
question? So
Yeah.
the screech owl that you have there is mostly gray in color, but I'm sure some of the young birders noticed that the photo that I have on our website, the screech owl is mostly red. Can you comment on the differences?
I'll let Bruce comment while I get this out of the way a little bit.
Thanks.
Yeah, so, and that's part of, got it in the rest of this PowerPoint, but unfortunately we revised the PowerPoint at the last minute and I've got the Screech Owl slides at the end, but I might,
That's okay, we'll get there.
okay.
But color codes.
Yeah, so in one brood of babies, so you could have 4 or 5 young, and they could be of, you could have 5 different colors, but basically you go from a cinnamon color to this gray color of this particular Screech Owl. He's really getting warm here. He's
Or
gotten,
it can be more like that color.
yeah, you could see some Screech Owls that are colored like this. I've seen some that really look brown. But in general, the farther east you go in North America, Eastern United States rather, you're going to find more of a reddish dominant Screech Owl. And as you go west, you find more Screech Owls that are grayish. And as you go north, you find more grayish Screech Owls. Iowa happens to be kind of in the middle, and we have both colors. I'm not sure if it's equal. I think gray might still be a little bit more common than red, but I remember there was a professor from Luther College, Tech Sordall, that did a study on this. He looked at all of the records that we had in the state, and we actually gave a bunch of those that information to him too. And I don't remember his results. I just remember that it wasn't skewed strongly one way or the other, I think.
You want to talk about the camouflage real quick while we're on the coloration?
Yeah, so Screech Owls are all owls actually, but Screech Owls in particular are pretty good at finding places to roost where they blend in quite well. And if they can't do that, then they often try to find places where they can typically hide. So that's they like to go into nest boxes and so forth. But conifers are probably one of the best roost sites for Screech Owls where they can actually hide and they'll stay in the shadow so you can't see them. Yeah, we're just kind of improvising here. Maybe I'm not going to do the rest of my program.
Oh, go ahead. You'll get into it.
Okay. It's kind of caught here, Marlene. It's not working.
Because you've got.
All right. There we go. So yeah, so this is a good example of the reddish phase Eastern Screech Owl. And I wanted to just mention that there are 3 common, these are the 7 nesting species of Iowa, 7 nesting owl species of Iowa. And the great horned owl, the barred owl, and the Eastern Screech Owl are all fairly common. They all can be found in towns. They're generalist species, as Marlene mentioned about the barred owl. They all eat a variety of things. They're not real picky. Screech owls are similar, but they have to be a little more picky because they're not very big, so they can't eat really huge or kill huge things like these other 2 owls can. And on the right-hand side, we've got our specialists. So the barn owl, the long-eared owl, and this is supposed to be short-eared owl, are all specialists, and so is the burrowing owl. One of the reasons these 3 are specialists is what they eat. Their favorite food is meadow voles. So barn owl's diet typically can be up to 90% meadow voles. So they're very specific in what they need to eat, or what they prefer to eat, I should say. Burrowing owls, on the other hand, this is our most diurnal or daytime burrowing owl species, and they actually can't see as well in the dark as the other owls. The 2 most nocturnal species, the ones that hunt primarily at night, are barred owl and barn owl.
And those 2 both have dark eyes.
They both have dark eyes. All the other owls of Iowa, and I think all of the visiting owls from other places, all have yellow eyes. So here's 2 of our winter visitors that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. The snowy owl is actually our biggest owl as far as weight, weighs up to 5 pounds, and then saw-whet owl is the smallest owl that comes into Iowa. These come in pretty regularly, which means pretty much every year we have sightings of both of these. Saw-whets are particularly found in conifer trees and In western Iowa, they're in the cedar groves primarily. And then these are 3 owls that have come into Iowa from time to time. They're called accidental Iowa visitors. The great gray is actually the tallest of all of the owls. It's 30 inches tall, but it only weighs 2.5 or 3 pounds. All 3 of these species are found in the boreal forest, so from Minnesota on north. This brings me to voles. This is what so many different owls love to eat, and one of the reasons they like this is a meadow vole. There's also a species called the prairie vole that's a little bit more grayish looking, and it's actually more of a prairie specialist found in dry areas. But I thought this was kind of an interesting photo. So this is a photo of the inside of a barn owl nest box. Papa barn owl has been stashing all of these meadow voles and one field mouse in this box to make sure that he's trying to draw a mate. He's trying to get the female barn owl to nest here. And sure enough, a week after this photo was taken, there were 2 barn owl eggs in this box. So apparently he was very good at influencing that female. He showed her that he was a good provider. But meadow voles, as I don't know if I've already, I already mentioned it once, but again, they are the main prey for the specialist owls like barn owl, short-eared owl, and long-eared owl. These are barn owl pellets. And if you find pellets under a tree, you're not sure what they are, you can usually tell by the size and the shape and what their content is, what owl dropped them. These are barn owl pellets are typically oval, maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches in diameter, and they almost always have vole skeletons within them. So Marlene just showed you how barred owls have a lot of injuries from collisions. I kept track of barn owls throughout my career. So this is 35, 40 years of data, and determined that of all the mortality records for barn owls, at least 40% of all of the barn owl deaths have been from getting hit by cars or trucks. And we know that's true for barred owls too. We've actually had several barred owls that were injured by a car but not killed, were repaired, rehabilitated, released back into the wild, and then 2 different barred owls that had leg bands on them were recovered just a year or 2 later. So they definitely get hit by cars quite a bit, and so do screech owls actually. Great horned owls not so much. One of the things that happens to especially screech owls and barred owls is they like to live along the river corridors, the wooded river corridors or the stream corridors, and they often get hit on the highway right where the bridges are. As they're crossing the highway, they tend to fly low over the highway. So I don't know how many of you know this. Here's a good reason why I don't want to ever rehabilitate raccoons, or I shouldn't say it quite like that, but there are probably 10 times as many raccoons in Iowa as there were historically. Historically, raccoons were eaten by cougars and wolves. They were, there were larger predators that kind of controlled them. Right now, raccoons are pretty much found in every woodland in the state. They're in our, certainly in our cities, they're very urbanized, but they definitely take over the cavities. If there's a cavity big enough for a nesting a barred owl or a great horned owl, the raccoons are a major enemy of the owls. They will eat the owls, they'll eat the babies, they'll eat the eggs, and they're extremely good at predating other animals. So that's a big threat. And then a lot of people don't think about this. But great horned owls are, this is the flying tiger. They can. I once got a call from a woman that had her favorite cat was out on the patio and weighs 12 pounds, and a great horned owl had killed her on the patio. So these guys can take very large prey. They're not picky. They eat skunks. Their main food is probably rabbits. But when we were releasing barn owls, we were at a restoration program for barn owls back in the 80s. 36 barn owls we released with radio transmitters. We know that 13 of them were eaten by great horned owls. This picture at the bottom shows you that's what's left of the barn owl after the great horned owl ate it. In one case, I found a foot of a barn owl in one of the great horned owl pellets. So here's our flying tiger. And this used to be the most common nesting species of the owls in the state. It is no longer. Our recent breeding bird atlas data indicates there's 45% fewer records than we had 20 years ago, but there's still lots of them. They're very good at nesting in a variety of places. I've seen quite a few nests in red-tailed hawk nests old red-tailed hawk nest is one of the favorite places that great horned owls nest, and then hollow tree cavities. So for instance, Brookside Park, 12 years in a row, great horned owls have nested successfully in this probably a cottonwood tree cavity in Brookside Park. This year, it looks like great horned owls have been there, but as of 2 days ago, there was the nesting hadn't begun, which is unusual. Typically, great horned owls start laying eggs by late January, and in southern Iowa, a little bit sooner than that. So basically, you'll see fledgling young by late April, early May. And the barred owl has become the #1 owl, most abundant owl in the state. It's been increasing. When I started my career, it was somewhat rare, and now it's really adapted. It eats a variety of things, as Marlene pointed out. It can even eat fish. And I got to keep moving here a little bit. So basically, barred owls will be laying eggs in March. They usually lay 3 eggs. Usually have 3 young. These babies are probably about a little bit less than a week old. These are probably 3 or 4 weeks old. Here they are. They're starting to climb around the branches of the tree. They're probably 6 or 7 weeks at this point. And then they're flying at 7 or 8 weeks. And then the parents will feed them for several weeks after they learn to fly. I just wanted to mention the long-eared owl because it's a very rare nester in the state. We haven't had a nest record for this bird since 2009. It's about the same size as the barn owl. Stands 15 inches tall, but it only weighs about a half a pound, so it's very light. And they're a specialist. They particularly nest in crow's nests. So none of these owls build their own nests except for maybe the blanking. Anyway, I'll get to it. I'll talk about it in a second. But this one particularly takes over crow's nest, and the last nest record we had was in 2009. This baby fell out of a tree in somebody's yard north of Sioux City, and it was and that nest was in a conifer tree. They're typically in conifer stands with lots of crow nests, and they like meadow voles too. Short-eared owls, another specialist. This species is a grassland species. It nests right on the ground, and the last nest we know for this was down in Pelican Grassland Bird Conservation Area in 2002. They typically raise 3 or 4 young, and they can start laying eggs certainly by late April or mid-April probably. So you'd be seeing young by June. Now here's the burrowing owl. This is the one I blanked on a minute ago. So these guys nest, they're a specialist because they really like to eat beetles. That's one of their favorite foods in the summertime. Through the wintertime, they migrate. You can see they have very few feathers on their legs, so they don't survive winter very well, so they have to migrate. But they nest in Iowa primarily in badger holes, and they often have a big brood of young. This if you ever are traveling in western Nebraska or the Pawnee grasslands of Colorado, you can see lots of burrowing owls in the prairie dog dens. That's kind of their favorite place. In fact, the Zuni Indians called them the prince of the prairie dogs. And then barn owl, we've mentioned this quite a bit already. This species got its name. Historically, it nested in savannas, and then when European settlers arrived, we cut a lot of the trees. Barn owls started nesting in our barns, and they still are. Basically, March 12th is the earliest egg day, earliest egg laying we know of in Iowa, so they could potentially nest in March. I'm guessing this year with a hard, cold winter we've had and 50 inches of snow, they may be nesting a little bit later. But they can nest twice in a year, and they can typically raise 4 or 5 youngsters in a batch. So you can see baby barn owls. I've seen baby barn owls that were fledging in November. So it's really actually barn owls in a family all of its own. All the other owls are Strigidae. This is a different family, so they're a little bit unique. And here's what barn owls look like when they're nesting in a tree, which is what they would do if we didn't have so many raccoons, probably. I just wanted to stress nest boxes. If you're interested in having, like screech owls, I think in Ames, certainly, it's a good place to put up a nest box for a screech owl, and you might have some good luck. We've heard screech owls singing in our backyard.
Other than this one, responding to this one.
Yeah, they're responding to that one. But this is a box in, this shows barn owl habitat. This is Savannah. This box has actually raised barn owls 8 years in a row down in Decatur County. It's sitting on top of a round metal corn bin, which is where the barn owls nested the first time. But nest boxes work quite well for barn owls. And finally, this should have been a little bit sooner. I mentioned that they can show up in lots of different colors. Even these youngsters, I'm guessing when they, about 2 weeks from now, when they get their feathers showing, there's probably at least a color gradation of three or four different colors here within one batch of youngsters. This species, I'm a little bit concerned about it. According to our breeding bird atlas data, so in a 20-year span, we have about a third as many screech owls right now as we would have had in the 1980s. Let's put it like that, based on the data that we have. One thing that you really want to be careful of, if you do have screech owls nesting in your backyard, whether it's in a tree cavity or in a nest box, do not get too close to them when the babies are coming out of the nest box or out on the tree limb. And especially if they fall on the ground, you want to watch out for the adults. The adults will attack. They're very aggressive, very good parents. So, but all you have to do is leave the owls alone. If you find a baby on the ground, wear a hard hat. Get the little baby back up on the branch. As long as the parents are nearby, they will take care of him. And that's probably the best way to, and then just avoid the backyard or wherever the owls are for a week or two until the young are flying on their own. And this time of the year, we find screech owls quite a bit in nest boxes. And so I do encourage people to put up boxes for them. If you have conifers, that's a good place to find them roosting in the daytime. And they aren't afraid to live in close proximity to humans. Here's a couple of fledglings that are sitting under somebody's eave on top of a downspout. And during the winter months, when one thing I forgot to mention, screech owls really like to eat beetles. So June beetles was one, at least back when June beetles were more common, that was a major food item for screech owls in the summertime. They also eat cicadas, katydids, grasshoppers, but this time of the year, they're probably eating field mice. And lastly, here we're back to the Wildlife Center's land, Wild Way. We've been putting up nest boxes. This is good screech owl habitat. We've got cedars in around each one of these nest structures. There's lots of grassland, lots of meadow mice for them to catch. And so we've provided them good places to both nest and roost during the summertime. I certainly encourage people to put up nest boxes. And that's it. Thank you.
Bruce and Marlene, thank you. That was fantastic. And
Yeah, you're welcome.
to Mr. Screech Owl too. Thanks for hanging with us and making an appearance.
Yeah.
Very special.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
If it's all right with you, I'd like to open it up for some questions from
Sure.
folks if they have any. If you have questions, folks, you can ask them a couple different ways. The first of which is you can unmute your microphone by clicking that button down in the lower left, and you can ask your question of Bruce and Marlene. You can also ask your question in the chat window, which if you click on the More button down on the bottom, a little menu will pop up and you'll see chat. If you open that up, it allows you to type a question into the chat if you'd rather do it that way rather than speaking. So if you have questions for Bruce and Marlene, now is the time to ask.
I don't know if it was mentioned, but do any owls
Oh, hit
do
it
any
again.
nest building?
What was your question?
Can you ask it again, Bill? I don't think we quite caught it.
I don't know if you mentioned it, but do any owls do any nest building?
No, and that was I started to talk about the burrowing owl. They're the only owl that I know of that will actually drag material down into the hole in the ground. But other than that, they pretty much nest on whatever substrate is there on the, excuse me, in a tree cavity or wherever they're nesting.
Thanks. Thanks, Bill. Luke, did your family have a question for us? I think you're still muted, Luke. I'm sorry.
There we go.
How many types of owls are there in the world?
Oh, that's a
Oh,
good question.
I forgot. I did know about a week ago, but I've forgotten now. Tyler, do you know? It's hundreds, but I'm not sure. It depends on if you get down into subspecies and different races, but it's not a huge number.
Not a huge number.
So there's some questions coming in that I'm seeing, and I'll read one. Where is the best place? Oh, I lost it. Anyone catching those? Where's the best place to find a Screech Owl nest box in Ames? Good question there
How
too.
about Wild Birds Unlimited?
As far as where they're erected or where you can buy one, Wild Birds Unlimited. And I don't know, Todd, if you or Stephanie or Michaela have gotten any news from some of your customers about nest box structures in Ames with screech owls in them. I have not.
So one thing I can add, screech owls will nest in wood duck boxes and kestrel boxes. They're all just fine. As long as the entrance is 2.5 inches diameter, they can get in.
Bruce, do you have some tips for us in terms of where we might put a nest box in Ames in our neighborhoods, or how to put it up? How high? You know, is there any things that we need to consider in terms of keeping other critters out of it?
Yeah, if possible, I'd get a pole of some sort, a wooden
How
pole.
high is the pole for the nest box?
Put it up about at least 8 feet up, I would say. It probably doesn't have to be quite that high. Some of our boxes are only 6 feet up, and that's kind of an experiment to see if they'll use them. But 8 feet would be better, and then definitely have a predator guard and make sure that squirrels can't get to the box. So it's kind of difficult. It might be easier to have a taller pole with the box up higher so that squirrels can't get to it, but
And put predator guards on it. Right.
that's the most important. Never put up a nest box without a predator guard, or you create a place for the animal to die sometimes.
So there's a couple questions in the chat that are somewhat related, Bruce and Marlene. The first is,
There it is.
and ideas for why we're seeing reductions in so many owl species in general, and then another question about why we're seeing reductions in Iowa of screech owls specifically.
Yeah, well, for the smaller owls for sure that eat insects, there's little doubt that the insect populations are much lower now than they used to be. In fact, I think worldwide, the data indicates maybe a third as many insects as we had 100 years ago. It's a lot of the insecticides that are being used in agriculture, especially in large scale agriculture, it's definitely having an impact on the number of insects that survive for those species that are eating those. Owls in general, Iowa has more roads than most states per square mile. So the road mortality is higher in the Midwest than it is in most parts of the country. So that's a big one. I didn't mention one of the reasons that great horned owls probably are declining. West Nile virus took a big hit on great horned owls about 10 years ago, maybe longer than that. But I don't think they ever recovered from that. And that's actually probably okay, because the great horned owls, there's still enough of them. And I think that I speculated a little bit that barn owls were making a recovery because the great horned owl numbers were down. And there's probably some relationship there to some extent.
So
But the loss of habitat is the number one. You just can't keep taking the habitat away from these species and expect them to survive. They've got to have food. They've got to have a food source, and they've got to have a place to nest.
So someone asked if the screech owl has a name. That's a really good question. We don't name our patients, but I do allow people to name our education animals. So we've been kind of saving the naming of this one for a special occasion. And if any of you would like to come up with a name and send it to us, we're going to add it to a list, and then we're going to have people vote on it. So if you've got a name that you really think that this owl should be called, share it with us. And you can share it with us through Todd or through Tyler, or you can find me and get that name to us. We'd love to hear what you think this owl should be called. So any other tips to help our owl populations aside from nest boxes? Save habitat. Do everything you can to, even in your yard, you know, we've got such a clean and green mentality. We've got, if you come by our house, we don't. We warned neighbors when we bought the place 15 years ago or so that we're biologists. And so when an oak tree lost its top, we left the snag. And it's just sort of decomposing as it goes, but it provides, you know, if woodpeckers come in and start a cavity, then owls can take over and use that cavity. So there's lots of reasons to kind of have a messier yard. And Tyler was talking about his brush pile. Brush piles and not raking leaves, all of that can protect animals, yes, but also be places for insects to live. And we talked about insect populations going down. And so that's a big part of it. Plant natural flowers and grasses and things, and that will promote the natural insects. So there's just lots of ways that we can be helping. Other organizations protect big places like, whoa, the old Boy Scout, no, the old 4-H camp. The Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation bought that and are going to protect it from development, so that will always be a wild place. So help organizations that are protecting some of our landscape. That's a good question.
Yeah, and Ames, I don't know how many of you know this, but Ames has been determined to be a bird-friendly city because of a lot of different reasons. One of them is because we have an extensive park system with, I think, at least 1,200 acres of protected land within the city boundary, which is huge. And so places like Brookside Park and Ada Hayden Heritage Area, these have huge numbers of different kinds of birds.
Yeah, someone saw a screech owl in a wood duck box above a pond. How common is that?
Pretty common. Iowa DNR, I don't know if they still do, but they used to spend a lot of time manning wood ducks and putting up wood duck boxes in the summertime and checking the wood duck boxes about this time of the year. And often when they were checking the wood duck boxes in end of February or early March, they would discover screech owls that were roosting in them. I think only one time did they find screech owls actually nested in the boxes. Those boxes helped those screech owls survive the winter around those marsh areas where they were finding them. Gave them nice winter shelter.
I have a question.
Sure.
So we live by a creek. It's on our property, and we often hear the great horned owl as well as a lot of barred owls.
Yeah.
But we've never seen one. Is there a time of day specifically to look for them, or?
Yeah, for the great horned owl, early and late. So like when I really want to see the great horned owls in Brookside Park, I go down right after sunset. Probably,
Okay.
yeah, between sunset and half an hour later. That's a really good time to see great horned owls. And it's a really good time to see them out in the country too. They'll be sitting on top of power poles and just perch hunting. Barred owls are a little more difficult because they're so nocturnal. But
Okay.
you can, if you drive slowly in the country, and like Ledges Park would be a good place. You potentially could see one if you drove slowly, just seeing it perched on a fence post driving into the park. Since I drove back and forth there to work and I was a workaholic, I often arrived in the dark and went out in the dark, and I saw barred owls quite frequently.
Thank you for the question. So another question, have you had any interesting owl or bird sightings lately? I'm working or being sick, one of the two, so not me so much.
I saw a merlin a couple weeks ago just north of Ames up by Soper's Mill, which I thought was pretty cool. You don't see very many merlins, but they do, some do winter here and they do nest here now. But yeah, I haven't been out, and one thing I did see this winter that I'd never seen before, and I've worked with eagles extensively. I was driving out to Wildway out by the Ledges Park, and on the way I noticed two bald eagles flying next to one another, and all of a sudden they locked talons and they did a pirouette. and just almost went clear to the ground, and then they parted and then flew away together. But I'd never seen that behavior before. Oh, do you need to add nesting material? Yes, thank you for asking that. Because owls do not make their own nest, you have to provide them. If you give them a nest box, put a couple inches of wood chips in the bottom, and that'll be adequate for them.
Along that same line, do all nest boxes need to be able to be opened and cleaned out at the end of the nesting season like some other birds?
Yes, that's ideal. Although there are exceptions. So barn owls, as long as the box isn't real dirty. So once barn owls have raised babies, or any owls have raised babies, then you really need to clean the box because they whitewash the inside. But if they've only, yeah, if it's not real messy and it's just full of pellets, I'd leave the pellets because the pellets make a good base for the eggs to be laid upon.
And partly it depends is sometimes the only response we can get, because sometimes they get infested with parasites, and which can be a problem. And so sometimes they might want to clean it out to prevent any transmission of parasites to a new nest. So there's always reason to be cautious about things. So
But the general rule would be to clean it once a year.
Yeah.
Before nesting.
So someone asked a really good question, and these have all been great questions, but this is something I meant to talk about. We get calls a lot about owlets being on the ground, and depending on their stage, whether they're nestlings or whether they're branchers or whatever their age is, she was taught that if you find one on the ground, like a great horned owlet, to leave it, because they have the ability to climb back up the tree with their talons and beaks. And they do at a certain age. And so again, it depends on the age. And I've seen barred owl babies do that too. They can be really good climbers using their beak and their talons to inch their way up, scramble their way up a tree to safety.
If they have any feathers at all, they'll probably be able to get up the tree.
And parents are really good at protecting their grounded babies. So, but with all the dogs and raccoons and cats and everything, we always like to get them at least back up on a low branch if possible. Good questions.
Oh, here's some Screech Owl eggs in case you want to see them. So this is the size of Screech Owl eggs. They're just a little bit smaller than ping pong balls. And all the owl eggs look white like this, and they're all about that shape, just different sizes.
Oh, I got a name recommendation. How about Ollie? There's one that we'll have to put on the list. I'm going to write it down right now. Thank you.
Any other questions for Bruce and Marlene?
That was a lot of good questions. Thank you.
And I think you know where to find us. You can hunt us down someplace and email us or otherwise find us and check out our website, and we're always happy to answer questions. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Bruce and Marlene. I did put the link to the Iowa Wildlife Center website in the chat, as well as the Iowa Young Birders website and the Wild Birds Unlimited AIM store website too. So I wish we were all in person so that we could all clap and cheer for you, Bruce and Marlene, and to show our sincere thanks for your great presentation this afternoon. I know I learned a ton, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. So thank you very much for taking the time to share with us this afternoon. To everyone who attended, thanks very much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time, especially on this nice, gorgeous winter day that we're having here in Iowa. It's quite a warm up from what we've had in recent days. So thanks very much. Check out those websites if you're interested in more information, and keep an eye on the Iowa Young Birders website for more upcoming virtual events, and the Wildlife Center website too, for that matter. So, all right, we'll sign off, folks. Thank you again.